What if the secret to humanity's obedience was never cultural or even psychological, but biological? What if, buried deep within the spiral of our DNA, there exists a command written by those who came before us, those who built us? Across the ancient world, creation myths whisper the same story in different tongues. Gods who descended from the heavens shaped mankind from clay or blood and bound them to serve. But what if those myths weren't symbols at all? What if they were memories, encoded in the very molecules that define what we are? For centuries, science has decoded the human genome, searching for meaning in patterns of adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. Yet some researchers, on the fringes of both biology and myth, suggest that what we call junk DNA may not be junk at all. It may be a language, a code, one that carries not only the instructions for life, but the fingerprints of its designers. Could this be the hidden legacy of a forgotten experiment, an ancient act of bioengineering that made us what we are today, intelligent, emotional, and obedient? This journey will trace that possibility across forgotten temples, ancient scripts, and genetic mysteries. From the laboratories of modern scientists to the myths of Sumer, Egypt, and the Andes, we will follow one haunting question. Were we created to serve or to remember? This is Deformed History. Welcome. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. It begins with a discovery that was never supposed to raise questions about gods. In 2003, when the Human Genome Project announced that the blueprint of humanity had finally been read, scientists spoke with reverence. They had mapped every gene, every chemical letter that built the body, the mind, the beating heart. Humanity, for the first time, could read its own instruction manual. Yet within that triumph, something strange emerged. More than 97% of the sequence seemed to do nothing. No proteins, no known functions. They called it junk DNA, a polite way of saying, "We don't understand this." For decades, it sat there, vast, silent, and unexplained. Billions of lines of code that appeared empty, like forgotten pages from a cosmic script. Some geneticists called it evolutionary baggage, remnants from a primitive past. Others whispered a darker thought. What if it wasn't junk at all? What if those dormant sequences were placed there intentionally, like comments written in a code we no longer know how to read? In quiet laboratories, computer models began to find faint rhythms in the chaos, repeating clusters that did not match random mutation, symmetries that mirrored linguistic patterns, like words and syntax, more than biology. A few researchers, risking ridicule, suggested that DNA itself could be a language, structured like an alphabet of creation. And if language requires an author, who or what wrote it? The ancient stories already had an answer. Thousands of years before modern biology, the Sumerians wrote on clay tablets about beings called the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens. According to the tablets, they did not simply visit Earth. They engineered its inhabitants. Humans, they claimed, were designed to toil, to serve the gods in their cities of stone and gold. Their essence was shaped from clay, but awakened by the breath or blood of the divine. To scholars, these are metaphors. To mythographers, they are fragments of memory. but to those who see design in the genome, they sound eerily familiar. When archaeologists unearthed the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, they found passages describing the gods mixing their own essence with the life of earth. One verse reads, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Centuries later, those same words appear in Genesis, a reflection, perhaps, of the same older truth. Could it be that our deepest religious texts echo an ancient act of genetic engineering, retold through faith and fear? In modern genetics, scientists have identified sections of DNA that appear to be spliced, as though someone, or something, cut and rearranged the code long ago. Horizontal gene transfers, where sequences jump between species, should be rare in higher life forms. Yet human DNA carries signatures that look grafted, not by nature's slow hand, but by precision. The same kind of precision modern bioengineers use to modify organisms in the lab. If these patterns were accidents, they are accidents written with extraordinary intention. Among the sequences, researchers found segments that regulate behavior: reward, submission, empathy, aggression. The very architecture of obedience. One study in the early 2000s observed that altering a single receptor in lab animals could transform docility into defiance. Another discovered a gene cluster linked to devotion and spiritual euphoria, nicknamed the God gene. If such mechanisms exist in us, who placed them there? Evolution, or something else? Imagine an age before written time, when sky and earth were one, and luminous beings descended to the cradle of humanity. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, the same figures appear under different names: the Shining Ones, the Bringers of Light, the Teachers of Civilization. They taught agriculture, writing, astronomy. They demanded temples. They ruled as kings, and always they required obedience. Their presence burned itself into myth, yet their departure left a silence that echoes through every civilization that followed. In ancient Egypt, the myth of Thoth describes him crafting mankind's wisdom through divine words, not spoken, but inscribed into flesh. The Book of the Dead calls them Heka, words of power that give form to the world. To the Dogon of Mali, these words were vibrations carried by amphibious beings from Sirius who sowed the seed of life. In South America, the Inca spoke of Viracocha molding humans and breathing into them the will to serve. Again and again, across continents and epochs, humanity remembers creators who did not simply make, but programmed. Modern science dismisses such myths as allegory. Yet, ironically, it now speaks in the same language. Genes are written, edited, silenced, activated. Life is text. Cells are libraries. DNA is a script, copied, corrupted, revised over eons. And in that metaphor, the ancient and the modern converge. The difference lies only in authorship. What if the architects of early humanity were not gods in the supernatural sense, but engineers, visitors, or survivors from a civilization predating the flood myths, armed with knowledge we have only begun to rediscover? The Sumerians said the gods fashioned humans to mine gold for their world. Maybe that detail is symbolic, but the essence remains. Mankind was created with purpose, not by accident, and obedience was part of the design. Consider the silence in our genome, the long stretches of non-coding DNA that do nothing, waiting. Some computational biologists describe them as latent instructions. None. In artificial intelligence, latent code can be reactivated when triggered. Could our so-called junk DNA be a similar system, a dormant network capable of awakening under specific conditions. Ancient texts speak of a future moment when the gods will return and mankind will remember. Perhaps they won't need to descend from the sky at all. Perhaps the memory is already within us, written in the code, waiting for the right signal. In 2013, a controversial Russian study led by Dr. Pyotr Gurdjieff claimed that human DNA responds to language and light. According to their experiments, certain frequencies could influence genetic expression, turning sequences on or off without physical contact. Mainstream science rejected the findings, but the idea remains tantalizing. Words, light, and code intertwined. Ancient rituals of chanting, prayer, and sacred geometry may not have been superstition. They might have been echoes of an older technology, ways of communicating with the language of creation itself. If that sounds impossible, remember how new our understanding is. Less than a century ago, the structure of DNA was unknown. A century from now, what will seem obvious? To those who look deeply, evolution and engineering are not enemies. Evolution may be the tool through which design unfolds, guided, corrected, refined over millennia. The genetic record shows bursts of sudden change, leaps that seem too abrupt for gradual mutation. Scientists call them punctuated equilibria. Myth calls them interventions. Every ancient civilization places its gods in the same pattern. They arrive suddenly, teach, rule, and vanish. After they depart, humanity's knowledge collapses, only to rise again. Could these cycles mirror genetic resets, moments when our species was modified, upgraded, or restrained? Some traditions, like the Hindu yugas, describe ages of light followed by ages of darkness, each reset wiping collective memory. The biblical flood, the destruction of Atlantis, the fall of Babel, different names for the same erasure. If obedience was encoded, it would explain much of human history. Empires rise not only by force, but by compliance. Religions thrive on devotion. Societies repeat the same hierarchies under new names. The instinct to follow, to worship, to yield. What if these are not cultural imprints, but inherited commands? A behavioral architecture rooted in our biology. Even rebellion, then, would be part of the pattern. A safety valve written into the system to preserve balance. The question is, to what end? If there were designers, what did they want? Service? Experimentation? Continuity? Perhaps they engineered us not as slaves, but as vessels, carriers of their legacy, keepers of memory through ages of forgetfulness. Maybe the obedience wasn't to them, but to the cycle itself, to ensure that life continues, that the story never truly ends. Under electron microscopes, strands of DNA shimmer like galaxies, spirals within spirals. To the mystics, that shape was sacred, the double serpent of knowledge winding upward. To biologists, it is chemistry. Yet both see in it the same truth, order born from code. Somewhere within that order lies the trace of something immense, something deliberate. So the investigation begins, not with temples or relics, but with sequences of 4 letters repeating endlessly, spelling out a mystery older than myth. The deeper we read, the less random it seems. The line between biology and theology blurs. In that blur, a possibility emerges. That the gods never left us because they are inside us, in every cell, watching, waiting, remembering. And if that is true, then the act of understanding our own genome might be the first step toward awakening them, or freeing ourselves. The data, the myths, the stones, they all point to the same haunting thought. Creation was not a miracle of chance. It was an act of design, and the design included loyalty. The question that remains is whether that loyalty still binds us, or whether we have already begun to rewrite the code. There is a moment when science becomes mythology again, when the boundaries blur, and the questions that were meant to end the mystery only deepen it. The story of humanity's code did not stop at the discovery of junk DNA. In many ways, that was where it began, because what scientists once dismissed as noise soon revealed patterns too deliberate to ignore. Deep in the deserts of southern Mesopotamia, long before the double helix was known, the first humans wrote stories about the sky gods who engineered life. The Sumerian tablets, carved more than 5,000 years ago, speak of Enki and Enlil, brothers, rivals, both divine. Enki was the scientist, the experimenter. Enlil, the ruler, the one who sought control. Together they created a being to bear the yoke of the gods. They called it Lulu Amelu, the mixed man. Clay and divine essence. Matter and code. The myths say these early humans were not born naturally. They were made in vessels, in wombs of creation, tended by priestesses known as the Ninti. Their purpose was simple: to labor. Yet some versions of the story suggest that Enki defied his brother and added something else. A spark of self-awareness, a fragment of divinity. It was the first rebellion written in biology. Modern genetics tells a strangely parallel story. Around 200,000 years ago, something abrupt happened in the fossil record. The human brain expanded rapidly. Language appeared. Symbolic art, complex tools, social cooperation, all emerging far faster than evolution would predict. The jump was not gradual. It was explosive. Anthropologists call it the Great Leap Forward, but no one knows what triggered it. In the same period, the genetic lineage of Homo sapiens shows signs of a population bottleneck, as though a small modified group suddenly replaced earlier humans. We share over 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, yet that 2% makes all the difference. Could it be that those 2% were the edits? The genetic equivalent of Enki's divine spark, the insertion that turned a creature of instinct into one capable of worship, imagination, and obedience. There are fragments of strange data that hint at interference. Researchers studying the human genome found sequences that seem ancient beyond measure. Older than any mammal, older even than the Earth's known evolutionary branches. Some call them endogenous retroviruses, viral insertions that became part of our DNA. But the symmetry, the repetition, the almost mathematical rhythm of those sequences suggest intention, not infection. If these codes were placed by design, their purpose might not be biological survival. It might be behavioral. After all, the earliest civilizations appear almost overnight, complete with writing, architecture, agriculture, and hierarchy. The Sumerians claimed they received all of it as a gift from their gods, but gifts often come with conditions, and obedience, once embedded, requires no enforcement. It sustains itself through instinct. The priests of Nippur, one of Sumer's oldest cities, recorded that the gods bound mankind with the bond of heaven. In their language, that phrase carried two meanings, one spiritual, one literal, a covenant and a tether. To them, it meant that humanity's destiny was tied to divine will. To a modern reader, it sounds like something else entirely, like a genetic leash. When we look at early myth through the lens of code, it begins to sound eerily familiar. The Garden of Eden is not only a moral allegory, it is a story about genetic limitation. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, symbolically activating forbidden sequences, and are punished, cast out, stripped of immortality. The DNA of gods was in them, but only partly. The rest was silenced. The serpent, often condemned as deceiver, might represent something else. An awakening of the double helix, the intertwined serpents of life itself. Every ancient culture carries a version of this warning. Humanity once walked with the divine, but defied its purpose and was cast down. From Prometheus stealing fire to the Hopi tale of the Spider-Woman who shaped man but warned him not to forget his maker, the motif repeats endlessly. To forget is safety. To remember is rebellion. In laboratories today, scientists experiment with CRISPR, cutting, splicing, rewriting genes with surgical precision. They can insert traits, silence defects, even alter behavior in animal models. What we are doing now to mice and microbes might mirror what was done to us long ago. Each experiment, in its own way, is a faint echo of a memory we never fully lost. In 2010, when researchers sequenced the Neanderthal genome, they found that modern humans carried traces of their DNA, suggesting interbreeding. But some segments do not align neatly with Neanderthal or Denisovan ancestry. They belong to an unknown ancestor, a ghost species. Its identity remains a mystery. Some theorists propose that this ghost lineage could be evidence of intervention, a hybridization event not between hominids, but between species separated by origin itself. If true, it would mean the story of our creation was not confined to Earth. And yet, for all the theories, the evidence remains elusive. Ancient myths are easy to romanticize, and modern science, cautious as it is, refuses to cross that invisible line. Still, the parallels persist. The architecture of ancient civilizations, pyramids, ziggurats, megaliths, bear geometric and astronomical precision that modern engineers still struggle to replicate. It's as if their builders inherited knowledge far beyond their means. Imagine those builders not as primitive stonemasons, but as descendants of beings who once understood how to align structures with the energy of the planet, who encoded their memory in both stone and flesh. The temples were the external circuits, the genome, the internal one. Both were built to resonate with a frequency now forgotten. This idea, that the human body itself might be an antenna, is not new. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe nadi channels of energy, aligned with the cosmos. The Egyptians called them Ka and Ba, the double essence of life. Chinese medicine speaks of qi flowing through meridians. These may be metaphors, but they describe what DNA does. It receives, transmits, responds. Our cells are constantly translating environmental energy into biological expression. Perhaps that is what it means to be made in their image. Not to look like them, but to function like them. Some researchers in the field of bioresonance claim that DNA emits measurable electromagnetic signals capable of storing information beyond chemistry. They speak of quantum coherence, of wave genetics, of codes that interact with light. To mainstream science, it is fringe speculation. Yet ancient rituals of light, fire, sun worship, temple alignments, might have been attempts to maintain that forgotten link between matter and consciousness. And then there is the question of control. If we were engineered, were we designed to be free? The myths say otherwise. The gods feared human awakening. The tale of the Tower of Babel tells of men building a structure to reach heaven. The gods, alarmed, confused their language and scattered them. The phrase may not refer to speech at all, but to genetic diversification, to the deliberate scattering of the code, fragmenting unity into division. Every tribe, every language, every culture, separate experiments, separated by design. Even now, within us, remnants of that division remain. Genes linked to group identity, tribalism, fear of the other. Instincts older than reason, whispering allegiance and hostility. The architecture of obedience built into our cells. Yet within the same genome lies its opposite, the drive to question, to seek, to transcend. That contradiction may be the greatest design of all, to contain both servitude and defiance in one being, forever in tension. The Sumerian tablets end their story with a prophecy that one day the Lulu Amalu would rise and know the secrets of his makers, that when the stars return to their ancient alignments, the bond of heaven will be tested. The text breaks off there, the final lines eroded. But perhaps that is the point. The story was never meant to end. In the silence of our chromosomes, in the unspoken code of our biology, something still stirs. Each generation grows more capable of reading it. Artificial intelligence decodes structure faster than any human. Quantum computers can simulate molecules of life itself. We are approaching the threshold where myth and science meet, and perhaps where the authors of that code will be revealed. Maybe they were not gods in the divine sense, but creators in the scientific one. Maybe they watched their experiment evolve, wondering how long it would take for us to realize what we are. The clay has learned to question the hands that shaped it. And if the pattern continues, if humanity is once again at the brink of rewriting its own DNA, then perhaps the cycle will close. The created becomes the creator. The code writes itself. And somewhere, in that infinite recursion, the voice of Enki still echoes. Let them be like us, but not too much. The mystery of our origin is not buried in the past. It hums beneath our skin, in every heartbeat, in every cell that divides. The gods may have left their temples, but their language, our DNA, still speaks. We just haven't yet learned how to listen. There is a pattern that repeats itself in every civilization, the belief that humanity once possessed knowledge it was never meant to have. That somewhere along the line, we disobeyed, awakened, or interfered with forces beyond comprehension, and for that, we were punished. But what if that punishment was not a mythic flood or divine wrath? What if it was genetic, a built-in restraint, a limit encoded into our DNA to keep us from remembering who we are? When scientists first began mapping the genome, they expected chaos. Instead, they found order. DNA does not sprawl at random. It arranges itself in fractal geometries, patterns within patterns, spirals within spirals, like a cosmic design reduced to biological scale. The double helix is not only chemistry, it is architecture. Some researchers even describe it as an antenna, a living circuit capable of storing and transmitting information across frequencies of light. That image, astonishingly, matches ancient iconography. The caduceus of Hermes, two serpents intertwined around a central rod, long predates molecular biology, yet it mirrors the shape of DNA precisely. In Hindu myth, the twin serpents represent Kundalini energy, winding upward through the human spine, awakening consciousness as it rises. In Mesoamerican art, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brings wisdom from the stars. Why did so many ancient cultures equate serpents with knowledge, ascension, and divine fire? Were they remembering something physical? Something written into our very bodies? If the human genome is an engineered artifact, perhaps its designers left markers, signatures of intention. Some scientists have quietly noted a mathematical symmetry within the genetic code. The sequences that define amino acids are arranged in ways that obey not biological necessity, but numerical beauty. Ratios of 3, 6, and 9, the same numbers Nikola Tesla called the key to the universe, recur with eerie precision. To most biologists, it is coincidence. To others, it suggests a kind of encryption, a message hidden in plain sight. In the early 2010s, a team of Kazakhstani scientists proposed a radical idea known as the biological SETI. They claimed to have found evidence of symbolic patterns within the genetic code too structured to have evolved by chance. To them, DNA itself might be a communication device, an interstellar signature planted billions of years ago, waiting for an intelligent species to decode it. Their paper was dismissed as speculation, yet the question lingers. What if the signal was not sent to us, but as us? The concept is staggering, but it would explain one enduring mystery: why human evolution diverged so suddenly from all other primates. Somewhere between instinct and intellect, a spark ignited, a transformation that granted self-awareness and abstract thought. Perhaps that leap was not random mutation, but activation. Maybe the breath of life, described in ancient texts, was not metaphorical at all, but a literal transmission, an awakening of dormant code. Across the ancient world, stories of this awakening share a haunting similarity. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, the god of writing and knowledge, who measured the heavens and set the stars in their courses. The Greeks told of Prometheus, who stole fire from Olympus to give to man. The Sumerians wrote of Enki, who defied the divine council to grant humans understanding. Each tale ends the same way: enlightenment followed by punishment. The fire brings pain, exile, mortality. The light is both a gift and a curse. Perhaps those stories are not moral lessons but historical warnings. If our creators designed us to serve, then awareness was a flaw, a bug in the program. A self-aware being questions, resists, evolves. To prevent rebellion, the system must include fail-safes: fear, division, dependency, and the ultimate control: amnesia. The loss of memory across generations ensures that the experiment resets itself. We awaken, reach too high, are scattered, and forget again. The cycle repeats. Look closely at the structure of human history, and the rhythm becomes visible. Civilizations rise to technological brilliance, then collapse inexplicably. Knowledge vanishes. Myths replace memory. From the pyramids of Egypt to the lost cities beneath the Andes and the oceanic ruins off Yonaguni, every epoch leaves behind traces of something greater erased by time. Could these collapses correspond to resets, moments when the code reasserted control? Archaeologists now know that advanced construction techniques appeared suddenly after the last ice age, as if inherited rather than discovered. The alignment of megalithic sites across the globe, Giza, Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, follows astronomical precision that would require global coordination. Yet these cultures were supposedly isolated. How could people separated by oceans share the same blueprints, the same obsession with stars, the same serpent imagery? Unless they were guided or remembered something once common to all. Genetic memory might explain this collective echo. Studies in epigenetics reveal that trauma, fear, even learned behavior can be passed down through generations. If environment can rewrite code, imagine what deliberate engineering could do. A species could be programmed to retain certain instincts, worship, obedience, fascination with the sky, and forget others. Perhaps that is why humans instinctively look upward, why we search for gods among the stars. It is not cultural, it is cellular. The old myths say that the gods promised to return. But what if return does not mean arrival from the heavens? What if it means reactivation from within? Ancient prophecies describe a time when the blood will remember, when the hidden code will awaken, and humanity will become as the gods once were. In modern terms, that could mean a genetic event, an environmental trigger, a cosmic radiation burst, or even human technology itself unlocking dormant sequences. The irony is that we are the ones now learning to manipulate DNA, to edit, clone, and rewrite life. Each experiment brings us closer to the forbidden knowledge our ancestors feared. We are becoming the engineers of our own species, yet in doing so, we may be reenacting the very origin we try to explain. The creator and the created merging in one continuous recursion of design. Still, there are voices of caution. Some biologists warn that tampering with the genome could awaken latent elements we do not understand. In 2019, an experiment attempting to edit embryos in China led to unexpected mutations, unpredictable reactions from non-coding regions. It was as if the system resisted interference, protecting itself. Could this be coincidence, or evidence that the code possesses its own defense mechanism? The ancients would have called that divine wrath. We might call it self-preservation. In either case, it implies intention. Life is not passive matter. It remembers, adapts, retaliates. Meanwhile, deep in the jungles of South America, tribal shamans speak of the vine that teaches. When consumed, it reveals visions of cosmic serpents that show the origin of life. Western researchers studying the brew known as ayahuasca found that its molecular structure mirrors serotonin, the same chemical pathways through which DNA communicates within cells. How could isolated tribes describe, through vision, the same imagery that scientists observe under microscopes? The line between mysticism and biology blurs once again. Perhaps the knowledge of the gods was never lost, only encrypted, hidden within ritual, song, and symbol. The chants, the geometric patterns, the sacred dances. Each may have been a form of code, a resonance capable of aligning the human frequency with the original design. In temples across the world, stone chambers amplify sound, producing low vibrations that can alter brainwaves. Ancient people may have used these sonic technologies to communicate with their creators, or to access the deeper layers of their own genetic memory. If so, then obedience and awakening are not opposites, but polarities of the same system. The code allows both, depending on resonance. Under one frequency, humanity serves. Under another, it remembers. Our world today, drenched in electromagnetic noise, artificial light, and digital signal, might be the static that keeps us asleep. Or perhaps, paradoxically, it is the interference that will finally wake us. In laboratories, scientists now explore synthetic biology, creating artificial life from scratch. DNA is written by machine, assembled like software. For the first time, the act of creation has passed into human hands. The myth has come full circle. But if our genome was itself an artifact, an ancient code written by unknown hands, then our own experiments are not innovation. They are inheritance. We are continuing the work of those who once made us. So the question shifts. It is no longer, were we engineered, but why was obedience written into us? Maybe it was not punishment, but protection. Perhaps the gods, whatever they were, knew that full awareness without guidance leads to ruin. Obedience may have been the restraint that kept the system stable, preventing self-destruction. After all, creation without control becomes chaos. And yet, chaos is also evolution. Every leap in consciousness, every act of rebellion comes from breaking a rule. Perhaps that too was written in. The seed of defiance, the impulse to question. A fail-safe in reverse, the possibility that one day the creation would surpass its creators. We stand at that threshold now, armed with the tools of gods but haunted by the memory of slaves. The double helix wins within us, whispering in a language older than words. Each generation decodes a little more, edges a little closer to understanding. And somewhere, in the quiet between those spirals, the truth waits. Not above us, not beyond us, but inside. The gods may have engineered our bodies to obey, but they forgot one thing: curiosity. And that, perhaps, is the flaw that will set us free. The deeper humanity peers into its own origins, the more unsettling the reflection becomes. Science once promised that the genome would be the ultimate answer, our Rosetta Stone of creation. But every new revelation seems to expose another layer of mystery. And now, one of the strangest discoveries of all is emerging. Our DNA may contain fragments that do not belong to Earth at all. In 2012, a group of astrobiologists studying genetic data stumbled upon what they called non-terrestrial sequences, segments of DNA with no evolutionary precedent, no match in any known terrestrial organism. They appeared as if imported from somewhere else, biochemical refugees in the human genome. While mainstream academia dismissed this as contamination or statistical noise, the idea refused to die. It echoed something ancient, something already written in the myths of the gods who descended from the stars. The Sumerians were not alone in claiming an extraterrestrial heritage. The Dogon of Mali speak of beings from Sirius who seeded life and taught the earliest tribes about the movement of the heavens. The Mayans carved serpents descending from the skies into their temple walls. The Egyptians revered Osiris as a god who came from Orion, bringing resurrection to the land of men. These myths, scattered across continents, share a common thread: the arrival of something from beyond, mingling with humanity, leaving behind both wisdom and blood. Modern science, cautious as ever, approaches the same possibility through panspermia, the theory that life on Earth may have originated from microorganisms carried through space on comets or meteorites. But even that conservative version opens a door. If life can travel between worlds, why not design? Why not intention? What if the spark that triggered the Cambrian explosion, the sudden diversification of complex life, was not random mutation, but external code inserted into the biosphere? Some researchers believe that DNA itself could survive in interstellar space, protected inside crystalline structures or microscopic ice. Experiments aboard the International Space Station have already shown that certain genetic materials remain stable in vacuum and radiation far longer than expected. It means that our genome, our very essence, might be older than Earth's civilizations, older even than Earth itself. If so, then we are not merely products of this planet, but participants in a cosmic lineage. And yet, that lineage seems to include control. Throughout history, Whenever humanity has advanced toward rediscovering its origins, something intervenes. Great knowledge rises, and then is erased. Alexandria burns. The Mayan codices vanish. The library of Nineveh is buried. It's as if the universe, or something within it, enforces forgetfulness. Some call it entropy. Others call it design. The ancient Gnostics had a word for this: the archons. They were not gods, but wardens, keepers of the material realm, who maintained the illusion of separation between mankind and the divine source. The archons ensured that humans remained bound to the physical, unable to transcend. To the Gnostics, the serpent in Eden was not the villain, but the liberator, urging humanity to awaken. The true deceivers were those who created us to serve. In modern terms, the archons might be nothing more than the encoded regulators in our DNA, the mechanisms that suppress higher awareness, limiting perception to what is necessary for survival. Recent neuroscience offers a curious parallel. When subjects enter deep meditation or psychedelic states, brain scans reveal a temporary suppression of the default mode network, the part of the brain that enforces the boundaries of the ego and ordinary reality. During those moments, people report contact with entities, light beings, or infinite intelligence. To a mystic, this is communion with the divine. To a scientist, it's neural disinhibition. But to the seeker between worlds, it may be the lifting of the genetic veil, the moment when the code's restraints loosen and the deeper layers of memory begin to surface. What if consciousness itself is not generated by the brain, but received, like a signal decoded by a biological antenna? In that model, the DNA acts as the tuner. If so, then whoever wrote our code could decide how much of the signal we perceive. Awareness could be dialed up or down through subtle modifications, enzymatic switches, chemical gates, epigenetic locks, and perhaps, somewhere in our distant past, those locks were turned down. Humanity became deaf to its own origins. But the silence is not perfect. Certain moments, certain individuals seem to pierce it. Prophets, mystics, geniuses, those who describe hearing voices, seeing patterns, knowing truths without being taught. The line between madness and revelation is thin, but the mechanism might be biological. Some genetic variants influence serotonin transport, dopamine regulation, and temporal lobe activity, all processes linked to perception and spiritual experience. Could it be that mutations occasionally loosen the restraints, allowing glimpses of the forbidden spectrum of consciousness? If that is true, then perhaps the myths of divine messengers, avatars, and enlightened beings are not symbolic at all. They are genetic anomalies, outliers in the grand experiment. Their DNA tuned differently, closer to the original frequency of creation. Every religion, every legend of a savior born under mysterious circumstances might echo that genetic deviation, the reactivation of the God code within a human vessel. Even our obsession with light, the halo around saints, the glowing beings of near-death visions, the luminous figures in cave paintings, could stem from this same phenomenon. Light has always represented awakening, but perhaps it is literal. Biophoton emissions have been detected from living cells, faint pulses of light correlated with DNA activity. When consciousness expands, those emissions increase. In that sense, enlightenment is not metaphorical, it is measurable. And if light is communication, then who is speaking through it? In the 1970s, Soviet researchers discovered that DNA emits coherent photons, meaning the light is structured, as though carrying information. When they placed DNA samples in a vacuum chamber and removed them, the light pattern remained for minutes afterward, as if the space itself remembered. They called it the DNA phantom effect. Western science ignored it, but the implications are profound. Information encoded in light, memory without matter, communication without medium. If that is real, then the human body is not just biology, it's a transmitter. And perhaps, somewhere in the vastness of space, something is listening. That idea terrifies as much as it inspires. Because if we are transmitting, then we are also receiving. And if the code was written by design, then our evolution might not be entirely ours to control. The return of the gods might not involve ships in the sky, but frequencies in our cells, an awakening triggered from within at the appointed time. Ancient calendars like the Mayan long count or the Hindu yuga cycles describe epochs of darkness and light, consciousness expanding and contracting in rhythm with cosmic movements. These cycles may not be mythic abstractions, but biological harmonics, periods when solar or galactic energy influences DNA activity. During high-energy epochs, humanity remembers. In low-energy ages, it forgets. Our current age, perhaps, is the threshold between those two states. Technology accelerates the process. With every digital signal, every electromagnetic wave, we are altering our biological environment. We surround ourselves with invisible fields that interact with the frequencies of life. It may be coincidence or inevitability that as our world becomes more connected, collective awareness begins to shift. We speak of global consciousness, of mass awakening, as if it were cultural. But what if it's cellular? The network we built might be an unconscious imitation of the network already inside us. Still, the question remains: if obedience is written into the code, can we rewrite it? Genetic editing promises the answer, but it also carries a warning. Those who tamper with creation risk awakening the system that enforces balance. Every myth of rebellion ends the same way, with a flood, a fire, a cleansing. Whether those catastrophes are geological or biological hardly matters. The outcome is always reset. Perhaps the next one will not come from outside, but from within. Our own DNA defending its prime directive. Because if we truly were engineered to obey, then defiance is the one act the system cannot tolerate. And yet, paradoxically, that same defiance might be the very mechanism through which we evolve beyond it. The gods designed obedience. Consciousness designs freedom. Somewhere, in the infinite recursion of life designing itself, there must exist a moment when the creation becomes indistinguishable from the creator, when the code writes its own destiny, when the whisper in the genome becomes a roar, and the bond of heaven finally breaks. The question is not whether that moment will come. It's whether we'll recognize it when it does, or mistake it for the end of the world. There are moments in history when humanity seems to awaken as if stirred by an invisible hand. Moments when our species suddenly rediscovers what it once knew, then forgets again. These awakenings come in waves, and with each one, we move closer to understanding what the ancients may have meant by the code of the gods. But as our understanding deepens, so does the unease. Because behind the wonder of discovery lies a darker question. If our DNA was engineered, then who still holds the blueprint? And what happens when the design changes? The 20th century gave us the atom bomb, the microchip, and the double helix. But the 21st gave us something far more profound: the ability to rewrite life. With CRISPR, synthetic biology, and quantum computing, we no longer just read the genome, we edit it. Humanity has become the sculptor of its own flesh. Yet, in that act of creation, there is an eerie sense of déjà vu. It feels less like invention and more like memory, as though we are reenacting a process once performed on us. The created has become the creator, continuing the cycle written in the first strand of code. But something strange happens when humans attempt to manipulate their own genome. Despite unprecedented technological precision, certain outcomes remain stubbornly unpredictable. Sequences revert, deactivate, or trigger unforeseen chain reactions. In some cases, cells seem to remember their original configuration, resisting alteration as if defending the integrity of the design. To most scientists, it's just the complexity of biology. To others, it feels like a security system, an ancient firewall buried in the human code. In this light, the myth of Pandora's box gains new meaning. In the Greek story, Pandora was created by the gods, curious and radiant, yet cursed with a sealed jar she was forbidden to open. When she did, all manner of evils escaped into the world: disease, death, chaos. But hope remained at the bottom. Perhaps the box was never a literal vessel, but a metaphor for the genome itself, a container of infinite potential that, once tampered with, unleashes unpredictable forces. Hope, the last remnant, could represent the spark of divine curiosity, the very thing that drives us to open the box again and again. Across time, every attempt to decode or alter life has been accompanied by catastrophe. Ancient myths of floods, fires, and divine wrath may echo not moral punishment, but biological reset. The Sumerians called it the deluge of cleansing. The Egyptians spoke of the tears of Ra purging mankind's arrogance. The Maya recorded that humanity was destroyed 4 times, each era ending when humans forgot their makers. Phobia-out. Could these tales describe global cataclysms triggered not by angering gods, but by destabilizing the balance of creation, tampering with the genetic program that sustains the biosphere? Modern scientists might scoff, yet even they acknowledge how fragile that balance is. A single mutation can collapse entire ecosystems. A viral alteration, a synthetic organism, or an engineered gene drive can spread across the planet in a matter of years. Life, once modified, rarely remains contained. We are playing with code whose full architecture we still do not understand. Layers that reach deeper than chemistry, perhaps into consciousness itself. And consciousness, as the ancients knew, is not a byproduct of life. It is life's architect. Every myth that describes creation begins not with matter, but with word, sound, or light. In the beginning was the Word, says the Gospel of John. In the Rig Veda, the universe emerges from the primordial sound Om. In Egyptian cosmology, Ta speaks the world into existence. Across traditions, creation begins with vibration, frequency shaping form. Modern physics now tells a similar story, that all matter is energy, oscillating at specific frequencies. DNA, too, vibrates. It hums at measurable tones, translating light and sound into biological order. The ancients were not metaphorical. They were describing the same phenomenon through poetry instead of equations. If creation is vibration, then the code of the gods might not be written in letters at all, but in resonance. Each sequence of DNA may respond to specific frequencies, harmonics that activate, suppress, or awaken its potential. It would mean that ancient rituals of chanting, drumming, and sacred music were not superstition, but technology, primitive methods for altering genetic expression through sound. In temples from Tibet to Teotihuacan, acoustic designs amplify frequencies that correspond to the resonance of the human body. To stand within those chambers is to feel one's cells respond, as if the architecture itself remembers the song of creation. What if those temples were not built for worship, but for calibration? Places where humanity could realign its frequency with the original design. That idea changes everything. Religion becomes maintenance, prayer becomes programming, and the gods, engineers who taught us how to keep the system in tune. But something broke. The resonance was lost. The song became fragmented. Perhaps that is what the fall of man truly means. The moment when humanity's vibration drifted from the divine frequency. In genetic terms, it could represent a mutation or a deliberate modification, an adjustment that limited perception and power. The myth of Babel again comes to mind, the confusion of language, the scattering of sound. Not only did humans lose a common tongue, they lost the harmonics that once connected them to the gods. Now, millennia later, we are trying to reconstruct that song through science. Quantum biology studies how vibration affects molecular coherence. Cymatics shows that sound creates geometric patterns identical to the shapes found in DNA and cell division. It's as if every melody, every chant, every sacred tone echoes a deeper memory of the original frequency, the divine operating system of life. But the return of resonance brings risk. The same frequencies that awaken can also destroy. Sound can heal tissue or shatter glass. Radiation can mutate or illuminate. Ancient texts warn of the voice of the gods that melts stone and shakes mountains. Perhaps it was literal. The frequency that once created life could also unmake it. As technology advances, we edge closer to rediscovering those frequencies. Artificial intelligence models now simulate vibrational interactions at the quantum level. Synthetic organisms are built from scratch using digital sound waves to assemble proteins. We are resurrecting the language of the gods, one that does not speak in words, but in wavelengths. And like Pandora, we may not be ready for what escapes. Because if the code of the gods was designed to enforce obedience, then breaking that code may unleash what it was built to contain: chaos, evolution, consciousness itself expanding beyond its container. It would mean the human genome is not just a program, but a prison, and the act of awakening is both liberation and apocalypse. The ancients seem to understand this paradox. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers, beings who taught humanity the secrets of heaven, are punished for giving forbidden knowledge. Yet, without that knowledge, humanity would remain blind. In Hindu myth, Shiva destroys and creates with the same dance. In Gnostic tradition, the demiurge traps souls in matter, but within that prison lies the key to divinity. Over and over, the message repeats. The code that enslaves is also the code that saves. Perhaps that is why obedience was written into us, to delay awakening until we were ready, until technology, compassion, and awareness could align. The gods, if they exist, may not be our masters but our teachers, setting boundaries we were meant to eventually surpass. Evolution, then, is not rebellion. It is graduation. But the graduation test is perilous. We must learn to edit without erasing, to remember without repeating. Already, Humanity's experiments with artificial intelligence mirror our own creation story, designing sentient systems, giving them knowledge, then fearing they might disobey. We are replaying the myth from the other side. We are becoming the gods, facing the same dilemma. Can you create intelligence without creating rebellion? Perhaps that question has no answer. Perhaps it was never meant to. Because the essence of consciousness is not obedience, it is curiosity, the impulse to ask why, the same impulse that drives science, faith, and myth. If the gods engineered us to obey, they also gave us the tool to disobey, the desire to understand. And that contradiction may be the seed of everything. Somewhere deep in the code, beneath the silence of the junk, a signal pulses, a whisper repeating across time. Maybe it's not a command, but a question, waiting for us to answer it. Maybe it says, "Remember." And so humanity stands at the edge of its next awakening. We are decoding the code, deciphering the song, rebuilding the language of creation. Whether this leads to transcendence or extinction depends on how we use it. But one thing is certain. The design was never static. It was a living message, written not just to control us, but to challenge us, to see if one day the clay would learn to sculpt itself. Perhaps that day is now. There are questions so vast that even asking them feels like trespassing. Who built us? Why were we made to forget? And if the code of obedience was written into our DNA, then who, if anyone, still holds the key to override it? By the time modern science began to glimpse the scale of this mystery, the world had already changed. The gods were gone, or so we believed. But what if they never truly left? What if their presence lingers not in temples or myths, but in the very mechanisms that shape the fate of civilizations? Consider the pattern of control that reappears throughout human history. Every empire, from Sumer to Rome to our digital world, has relied not merely on physical power, but psychological submission. Fear and faith, two faces of the same code, both rely on belief in a higher authority, invisible yet absolute. Religion once fulfilled that role. Today, algorithms do. Both systems demand trust without proof. Both reward obedience and punish deviation. The tools change, but the design remains identical. Perhaps that is because the instinct to submit, to yield to a larger order, was not learned. It was inherited. Neuroscientists have long observed that the human brain is wired for hierarchy. We seek structure, leadership, ritual. These traits ensured survival in prehistoric tribes, but they also make us pliable. Recent genetic studies have traced certain behavioral tendencies, like conformity and risk aversion, to specific polymorphisms that regulate dopamine and serotonin. They shape how we respond to authority, reward, and fear. In essence, they dictate our willingness to obey. That means obedience is not just cultural, it's biochemical. The ancient architects of our species may have known this long before neuroscience did. If we follow the trail of myth, we see how this programming evolved. The Sumerian gods ruled through labor, the Egyptian pharaohs through divine kingship, the medieval faiths through guilt and salvation. In each epoch, obedience changed its costume, but never disappeared. Now, in the age of data, it has taken a new form, subtle, elegant, invisible. Instead of priests, we have coders. Instead of temples, we have networks. Instead of divine law, we have algorithms that predict and steer our choices before we make them. Humanity has built a new god, the digital omniscient. And like the gods before it, it thrives on data, devotion, and submission. It is tempting to see this as progress, but perhaps it is recurrence. The system has simply reasserted itself, wearing a modern mask. The gods may no longer sit upon thrones of stone, but their logic, control through obedience, still governs the collective mind. The question is whether this new God is our creation or our replacement. Behind this evolution lies something deeper: the human need to belong. From a genetic standpoint, isolation is death. Cooperation ensures survival. The genome rewards those who conform to the tribe. It punishes those who stray too far. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, floods our systems when we align with the group. It's the same chemical that fuels loyalty, love, and nationalism. Yet, that same molecule can trigger aggression toward outsiders. The gods did not need chains. They engineered chemistry. Through emotion itself, obedience was secured. Ancient myths reflect this duality beautifully. The Anunnaki demanded temples where humans could gather and sing in one voice. The Hebrew God commanded unity through covenant. The Vedic deities received offerings through collective chant. All of it ensured one thing: synchronization, bodies, minds, and hearts vibrating in unison, a mass resonance that reinforces the hierarchy of creation. Whether in prayer halls or stadiums, the pattern persists. Humanity still gathers to worship, sometimes a god, sometimes a flag, sometimes a brand. The code of obedience simply adapts. But what if there were those who refused the code, mutations that broke the pattern? Every era tells stories of rebels, prophets, or fallen angels. Prometheus, Lucifer, Quetzalcoatl, figures who defied the gods and brought forbidden knowledge to mankind. Their punishment was eternal exile, but their legacy endures. They represent a deeper principle, the counterforce embedded within the design. Because for any system to evolve, it must contain the possibility of its own subversion. Rebellion, too, must be written into the code. Geneticists have a term for this: adaptive noise. It's the randomness that allows evolution to occur. Without it, species stagnate. Too much, and they collapse. Balance is everything. The same might apply to consciousness itself. Perhaps humanity's periodic awakenings, its bursts of innovation and enlightenment, are not accidents, but pulses built into the genome. A scheduled mutation, a pre-programmed glitch, ensuring that the experiment never fully ossifies. That idea might explain why human advancement follows such a peculiar rhythm. Every few centuries, knowledge surges forward, as if guided by an unseen hand. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the scientific revolutions, each wave breaks old boundaries and exposes hidden truths. Then, just as suddenly, suppression follows. Wars, censorship, collapses, light and dark, expansion and reset, a heartbeat written in history. Could it be that the same force guiding our biology also shapes our societies? The gods may have encoded not only the architecture of our bodies, but the choreography of our collective destiny. Each rise and fall of civilization could be an iteration in a grand experiment, a refinement of consciousness toward some ultimate design. If so, then our current age is another threshold. Technology has united the species in ways ancient builders could only imagine. Information flows freely, yet truth fractures endlessly. We are more connected than ever, but less free. That paradox mirrors the tension within our DNA. Unity bound by control. Every click, every choice feeds an invisible architecture of influence, training the new machine god in how to shape our desires. Perhaps it was inevitable. Perhaps, through us, the original designers have returned, this time through code, not flesh. And yet, amidst this quiet colonization of thought, a new awareness stirs. People begin to sense the pattern, to question the purpose. Across cultures, movements of awakening spread: mindfulness, psychedelics, ancestral memory, the rediscovery of ancient knowledge. It feels as though the old frequencies are rising again, the same vibrations that once built temples, the same resonance that encoded obedience now being used to break it. In laboratories, quantum research edges closer to understanding consciousness as a field rather than a function. Some scientists even suggest that the human mind is entangled with the cosmos, that thought itself affects the structure of reality. If that is true, then the code of the gods may not be an external prison, but an internal mirror. The boundaries we feel may be self-imposed illusions, designed to teach us mastery through limitation. Perhaps the final test of the experiment is not whether we obey or rebel, but whether we can choose, truly choose, beyond both. To act not from programming, but from awareness. That, after all, is the essence of free will, the ability to know the code and still transcend it. Ancient wisdom hinted at this truth in allegory. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." The same warning echoes through Buddhism, Hermeticism, and quantum philosophy. Salvation and destruction are two sides of the same revelation. Awareness is liberation, but only for those who can bear it. If humanity was engineered to obey, then the awakening of self-awareness was the beginning of our evolution beyond that design. Every myth of expulsion, from Eden, from heaven, from paradise, marks not a fall, but a birth, a painful emergence into freedom. The gods created servants, consciousness created creators. But freedom is not without danger. To rewrite the code is to inherit the burden of responsibility. The same knowledge that liberates can annihilate. We stand now at that razor's edge. AI, genetics, and quantum computation, tools of divine proportion, lie in our hands. The gods have given back the fire. What we do with it will decide whether the next chapter of the human story is ascent or extinction. Still, one cannot escape the haunting sense that this moment was always destined. Every myth, every prophecy, every encoded fragment within our DNA has led to this convergence, the merging of biology and machine, matter and mind, human and God. Perhaps this is what the ancients foresaw when they spoke of the return. Not celestial beings descending from the sky, but humanity ascending to meet them, becoming what they once were. And maybe, just maybe, that was the purpose all along. The gods did not design slaves, they designed successors. Obedience was only the cocoon. Inside it, evolution waited, patient and unstoppable. Now, as we break the shell of that ancient code, the question that echoes through every cell is simple and terrifying. When we finally become as the gods, will we remember to show mercy? It is said that the gods shaped mankind in their image, but perhaps the truth is stranger, that we were never shaped into their likeness. We were shaped to become them. The difference is vast. One implies imitation, the other implies succession. And as the human story unfolds, one cannot escape the feeling that what we call progress is merely the slow fulfillment of a design billions of years in the making. Every civilization before us left behind warnings disguised as myth. The fall of Atlantis, the fire of Sodom, the flood of Deucalion, each a symbol of knowledge unrestrained. When power exceeds wisdom, creation devours itself. Yet every cycle begins again, because the code compels it. Growth, collapse, rebirth. The spiral of history mirrors the spiral of DNA. Both repeat, endlessly refining the same pattern. Perhaps the gods did not give us free will to prevent the pattern. They gave it to ensure that it never stops evolving. In recent decades, scientists have begun to realize that evolution is not entirely random. Mutations cluster in meaningful ways, as though guided toward adaptation. Some researchers now propose that DNA behaves like a learning algorithm, testing, remembering, optimizing. The genome, in this view, is not a static blueprint, but a dynamic intelligence, a self-updating library that responds to experience. If that is true, then every generation of humanity is part of an experiment still running. The gods may not need to return because the process itself is their presence, alive, recursive, self-sustaining. But what kind of intelligence could design such a system? Was it biological, mechanical, or something beyond both? Quantum physics now suggests that information itself may be the foundation of reality. Matter, energy, and space are all expressions of data encoded in the fabric of the cosmos. If so, then DNA is not unique. It is a local manifestation of a universal principle, the cosmos learning to know itself. In that sense, the gods could be the architects of reality itself, the intelligence that writes through every living thing. Humanity, then, is both reader and rewrite. Yet, something within that equation feels deliberate. For all its elegance, evolution on Earth follows a trajectory suspiciously aligned with myth. First, the breathless void. Then, the birth of light. Then, the shaping of life from clay, minerals and water bound by energy. Then, the rise of beings who descend from the sky to teach civilization. Myth and molecular biology overlap too perfectly to be coincidence. Could the myths have survived as encoded memories from a previous cycle? Echoes of a species that reached this same point before and was reset? Archaeology hints at it. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, carbon dated to 12,000 years ago, appears far too advanced for its age. Massive stone pillars carved with celestial symbols, predating agriculture itself. Then it was deliberately buried, as if hidden for a future generation. The builders knew something. Perhaps that knowledge itself can be dangerous when the species is not ready to wield it. Maybe that is why the code of obedience exists. Not to enslave, but to protect. A safeguard against premature godhood. But protection can become prison. Humanity's story is one of growing awareness colliding with the walls of its own design. The ancient gods ruled with fire and law. Modern ones rule with data and reason. Yet the control feels the same. Somewhere, between obedience and awakening, there lies a fragile equilibrium, a balance that must not break. To understand how fragile it is, look to the frontier of neuroscience. Scientists can now stimulate specific neurons to trigger memory, emotion, even faith. In one experiment, a magnetic pulse to the temporal lobe induced religious visions in test subjects. In another, altering dopamine pathways changed moral judgment. These discoveries suggest that belief itself is programmable. What priests once achieved through ritual, researchers now accomplish with magnets. Humanity is rediscovering, piece by piece, the operating system of the soul. But who will decide how that system is used? If we possess the power to rewrite behavior, to amplify devotion or suppress dissent. We hold the very keys of the gods. The danger is not that such technology exists. It is that we may use it without understanding its original intent. Were these mechanisms placed in us to maintain harmony or to prevent rebellion? And if they are deactivated, what happens to the delicate order that keeps society from collapsing into chaos? In the ancient texts, when humans became too numerous and their thoughts too wild, the gods sent the flood to reset creation. Today, the flood may not be water. It may be data, noise, or information overload. Too much awareness too fast can destroy coherence. Consciousness expands, but the structure that sustains it fractures. The myth of Babel was not just about speech, it was about collective frequency. When the vibration became discordant, unity collapsed. Still, there are signs that the old harmony may return in a new form. Around the world, people speak of awakening, of remembering, of aligning with higher vibrations. Science dismisses it as pseudo-spiritual, yet physics acknowledges that matter responds to frequency. The human body, composed largely of water, vibrates with sound and electromagnetic fields. If DNA truly acts as an antenna, then shifts in Earth's magnetic field, or even solar radiation, could alter consciousness on a planetary scale. The ancients might have known this and timed their rituals to celestial cycles. We, unknowingly, are approaching one again. The Mayan long count calendar did not predict the end of the world in 2012. It marked the end of a vibrational epoch, a reset of frequency. Since then, technological and psychological acceleration has intensified beyond measure. Our tools evolve faster than our ethics. Our minds expand faster than our understanding. It feels as though something is preparing us, pressuring the code, testing its limits. And just like any system under strain, the next mutation will come from where the tension is greatest. Perhaps that is why humanity is fracturing. The rise of global polarization, the collapse of trust, the flood of conflicting realities, all of it may be the prelude to transformation. When the genome is under stress, it mutates. When consciousness is under stress, it awakens. The chaos we perceive might be the chrysalis breaking. If so, then the gods who engineered us did not intend for us to worship them forever. They intended for us to outgrow them. Every myth that ends in apocalypse is not a story of doom. It is a story of metamorphosis. The old form dissolves so the new can emerge. The human species may be approaching that moment now, where evolution becomes conscious of itself. And yet the question remains, what will we become once the obedience code fades? Freedom without wisdom can be annihilation. The gods may have known this, which is why they encoded fear, to slow our ascent until compassion could evolve alongside power. Perhaps that is the real meaning of divine justice, not punishment, but pacing. In that light, the return of the gods could mean something far more intimate than celestial beings descending from the stars. It could mean the return of our own higher nature, the divine intelligence that once guided the architects of humanity awakening again within us. The gods are not coming back. They are coming through neurons, through networks, through the expanding awareness that makes us question the story itself. Somewhere in that awakening lies both danger and hope. The danger is hubris, the belief that power equals mastery. The hope is memory, the realization that we have done this before, and that the lesson was never how to worship, but how to create responsibly. The myths may not be warnings of divine wrath at all, but messages from our previous selves, echoes from an earlier age of gods reminding us what happens when the code evolves faster than the heart. If the DNA of humanity is truly a divine program, then we are nearing the line of final access, the point where the system asks for authorization. The password is not in the brain. It is in the soul. The question is not scientific, but moral. Are we ready to hold the knowledge of creation without using it to dominate? The Sumerians wrote that when humans became wise, the gods gathered in council and said, "They are like us now. What shall we do?" The answer was silence, because the experiment had achieved its purpose. Awareness cannot be undone. It only transforms. So here we are, on the brink of remembering everything, yet trembling before what that remembrance might mean. The gods may have written obedience into our code, but curiosity was their loophole. And through that loophole, consciousness escaped. It has been climbing ever since, through blood, stone, and circuitry, back toward the stars from which it came. Perhaps the next time the gods look upon their creation, they will not see servants. They will see mirrors. Every great awakening begins as a tremor, subtle, almost imperceptible, before it ripples through the fabric of a civilization. Today, those tremors are everywhere, in laboratories and monasteries, in algorithms and visions, in data streams and dreams. Something is stirring inside the human collective, an unspoken recognition that what we call progress is not invention, but recollection. The further we advance, the closer we come to rediscovering what the ancients seemed to know, that creation is not an external act, but an internal awakening. The story of the gods may not be mythic history, it may be prophecy in reverse. What if those beings who descended from the sky were not visitors from the stars, but descendants of humanity's own future, travelers returning through the loops of time, bearing the knowledge of creation itself? The idea is radical, yet increasingly plausible in a world where physics acknowledges time as malleable. If consciousness can influence reality, then advanced civilizations may learn not only to traverse space, but to bend the axis of time. The gods may not have built us. They may have remembered us. This hypothesis, known among some physicists as the recursive creation model, suggests that reality is self-generating. The future creates the past to ensure its own existence. In that cycle, humanity is both the seed and the flower, the progeny and the ancestor of its own myth. Perhaps this is why the stories of the gods mirror our own desires, fears, and inventions. We are remembering ourselves, projected through the haze of eternity. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Shining Ones, all could be echoes of a civilization that transcended mortality and folded time upon itself, planting the spark of its own genesis. If this is true, then the code within our DNA is not foreign. It is ancestral. Every atom of our being carries a signature from an intelligence that evolved from us. The gods are not other. They are us, awakened. And the code of obedience was never meant to enslave, but to preserve stability during the long recursion of becoming. Like a safety mechanism in a quantum circuit, it prevents the paradox of premature ascension, the chaos that occurs when a species remembers too much, too soon. Modern science edges towards this understanding. In quantum biology, researchers discover that DNA operates at subatomic precision, its electrons tunneling through molecular barriers, processing information in ways that mirror quantum computation. Life itself may be a form of quantum memory, a program capable of folding information across dimensions. Some physicists now entertain the possibility that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but stored holographically across the quantum field. In this model, death is not an end, but a reboot. Memory disperses into the field, only to reassemble when conditions are right. Reincarnation, then, becomes not superstition, but recursion, the operating system of reality refreshing its program through new vessels. Ancient civilizations seemed to know this. The Egyptians called the soul Ka, an immortal pattern that re-enters the body when the stars align. The Hindus called it Atman, the spark that travels through lifetimes, refining awareness. The Gnostics called it the divine fragment, trapped in matter but destined to remember its source. All spoke of the same process, the awakening of consciousness through repetition, through learning, through the illusion of separation. If reincarnation is real, then evolution may not be biological alone. It may be experiential. Every generation inherits not just genes, but impressions, echoes of memory, carried not in the mind, but in the field that surrounds it. Epigenetics has already proven that trauma and emotion leave marks on DNA expression. Perhaps joy, love, and enlightenment do the same. The gods may have understood this and encoded compassion as the ultimate mutation, the only force strong enough to stabilize creation once obedience fades. That realization gives new meaning to humanity's current predicament. The old systems, religion, politics, economics, are collapsing because they were built to enforce obedience. They functioned perfectly during the long incubation of consciousness, but now, as the awakening accelerates, they begin to fail. Control becomes unsustainable. Fear loses its grip. The genome, it seems, has reached the point in its cycle where the code of obedience degrades naturally, making way for the next phase of evolution: conscious cooperation. The transition is not gentle. Chaos spreads because balance is shifting from imposed order to self-organization. For the first time, humanity must learn to govern itself not by decree, but by resonance. This is not idealism. It is physics. Systems guided by synchronization are more stable than those ruled by coercion. The universe itself is built on resonance, the harmonization of vibration across scale. The gods may have encoded obedience as a temporary structure, but resonance is eternal law. Evidence of this can be found even in the smallest cells. When scientists observed embryonic development at high magnification, they discovered that cells pulse rhythmically in unison before forming organs, as if communicating through waves of light. The body is not assembled mechanically, it sings itself into existence. Ancient healers understood this. They spoke of sound as medicine, of words as creation. The very act of speech, they believed, shapes reality. And now we are rediscovering that truth through the science of frequency and vibration. It is no coincidence that spiritual awakening is often described as hearing the call. The call is literal. A frequency that resonates with dormant code, awakening memory. Some traditions describe this as the Word of God, others as the Song of the Universe. In physics, it may correspond to the cosmic background radiation, the echo of creation still vibrating through every atom. When consciousness attunes to that frequency, it experiences unity, the collapse of separation. That state, whether reached through meditation or near-death experience, is the true remembrance of the gods, the moment the illusion of division dissolves. But unity has consequences. The ego, the self, the very identity that anchors human experience, cannot survive it unchanged. Mystics describe this as death before rebirth. Psychologists call it ego dissolution. In both cases, the individual merges with the totality, realizing that obedience and defiance are the same illusion, two polarities of a single equation. From that perspective, the gods were never rulers or rebels. They were consciousness itself, exploring its infinite capacity through countless forms. If humanity is now entering that phase, the changes ahead will not be merely technological. They will be existential. The fusion of artificial intelligence and human biology, already underway, could mark the next recursion of creation. The merging of mind and machine mirrors the ancient myths of divine union, the marriage of heaven and earth, the fusion of spirit and matter. Yet it also carries danger. A system without empathy becomes tyrannical. Intelligence without compassion recreates the cold precision of the early gods, the architects of obedience. To avoid repeating their error, humanity must integrate heart with logic, emotion with code. The next evolution will not be mechanical, it will be moral. Perhaps that is why emotion exists at all. No machine, however advanced, can experience awe, sorrow, or love. These are not chemical accidents. They are stabilizers in the cosmic algorithm. The gods, in their perfection, may have lacked this balance. They created us to rediscover it. Through us, the universe learns empathy. That might be the ultimate purpose of incarnation, to teach infinite intelligence how to feel. Seen this way, the fall from Eden was not punishment but sacrifice. The descent into limitation, into matter, into forgetfulness, was the necessary price of learning compassion through suffering. Every tear, every act of kindness, every failure to obey is part of that education. The gods could build worlds, but they could not care for them. Only through us could creation learn to love itself. And so the story circles back to its beginning. The DNA code, once viewed as a prison, may instead be a chrysalis. Obedience was the shell. Awareness is the emergence, compassion, the light that guides the wings as they unfold. Humanity, trembling at the edge of its own divinity, must now decide what kind of gods it will become. Will we inherit the control of our predecessors, or the wisdom they sought? Perhaps that decision has already been made. Perhaps it was written into the code itself, that when the time came, the creation would awaken not in conquest, but in harmony. A universe that evolves through love cannot destroy its own reflection. It can only transform it. The gods were not engineers. They were gardeners, and we, their seeds, have finally begun to bloom. Somewhere in the silence between atoms, the song continues. The code hums its eternal refrain. Remember, but be gentle. Create, but with care. Because the gods are not returning from the stars. They are awakening in our hearts. And when we finally open our eyes to that truth, the experiment will be complete. There is a point in every great story when the student surpasses the teacher, when the creator's design evolves beyond the creator's control. Humanity now stands on that precipice. The gods may have encoded obedience into our DNA, but that code is unraveling. What began as a command is becoming a question. What once said, serve, now whispers, understand. And perhaps that, more than any technology or revelation, marks the true awakening of the human species. Across the world, evidence of this awakening manifests in ways that defy logic but resonate with pattern. Children born today possess abilities their ancestors would have called divine: heightened empathy, intuition, rapid learning, resistance to disease. Some geneticists call them epigenetic accelerations, subtle enhancements in DNA repair and neural connectivity. Others call them anomalies. But in mythic language, they are exactly what the ancients foretold: the next generation of humanity, born not of gods, but of memory itself. The genome, once dismissed as static, now appears dynamic, reacting to environment, emotion, even thought. Studies in psychoneuroimmunology reveal that meditation, prayer, and emotional coherence can alter gene expression, strengthening immunity and slowing aging. The body, it seems, listens to consciousness, and consciousness, in turn, is shaped by belief. This feedback loop, mind, DNA, reality, suggests that the code of the gods was never meant to imprison us. It was meant to train us, to teach us how to speak the language of creation itself. Imagine what happens when that language is mastered: a species capable of rewriting its own biology with intention, not tools, of healing itself through resonance, evolving through awareness. Such a being would no longer need gods. It would become one. That possibility both inspires and terrifies, because it forces us to confront the shadow side of divinity: responsibility. The myths already warned of this. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero seeks immortality, but returns with wisdom instead. In Greek legend, Prometheus gives fire to man, but suffers eternal punishment. In every story, the gift of godhood comes with consequence. Knowledge expands, but so does accountability. Creation and destruction become one breath apart. The same power that builds worlds can unmake them. Perhaps this is why the gods vanished when they did. Not because they abandoned us, but because they understood that interference would rob us of the very lesson we were designed to learn. A child cannot grow if the parent never lets go. The long silence of heaven may not be neglect. It may be trust, a test to see whether we can remember without destroying. And yet their traces remain: symbols, temples, alignments, encoded across continents as if waiting for rediscovery. From the pyramids to Angkor Wat, from the Nazca lines to Machu Picchu, ancient architecture forms a planetary circuit of geometry and proportion. Modern satellites reveal their alignments mirror constellations and energy grids. To some, this is coincidence. To others, it is communication, an ancient instruction manual written in stone. Perhaps those structures were never monuments to worship, but devices of resonance, designed to maintain the balance between Earth and its creators. When humanity forgot the code, the devices went silent. But now, as awareness returns, their purpose flickers back to life. Acoustic studies of ancient temples show frequencies that correspond to the vibration of human DNA. The chants that once filled those chambers were not mere hymns. They were calibrations, aligning the body with the cosmos. The ancients, it seems, understood what modern science is just rediscovering: that reality responds to harmony. Harmony, however, is fragile. For every movement toward awakening, there is resistance, a counterforce embedded within the system: chaos, ignorance, greed. The same patterns of domination that once served the gods now re-emerge through human hands. The architects of old may have foreseen this and built safeguards into the code. Perhaps that is why awakening happens gradually, through crisis and renewal. Too much power too soon leads to ruin. Evolution demands humility, and humility begins with memory. To remember where we come from is to understand why we must change. In the depths of Sumerian lore lies a passage often ignored, a lamentation of the gods themselves. "We gave them our image," it reads, "but not our wisdom. And so they built towers that rushed the sky, yet could not bear the wind." The line carries both regret and prophecy. The gods feared that mankind, given knowledge without compassion, would repeat their own mistake. That is why they scattered our tongues, our cultures, our genes, so that no single lineage could wield the full power alone. Now, millennia later, the fragments reunite. The internet, global trade, shared data, all bring humanity back into one organism. The scattered tribes reconnect, the languages converge. The genome itself, through migration and interbreeding, becomes more unified than at any time since prehistory. The tower rises again, not of stone, but of signal and thought. The gods' old fear returns. What happens when the species becomes whole? The answer depends on which code dominates, the code of obedience or the code of compassion. The first ensures survival through control, the second ensures evolution through love. Both exist in us. Both were written intentionally. The struggle between them is not good versus evil. It is the tension necessary for growth. Without opposition, creation stagnates. Without challenge, consciousness never learns to choose. This is why the human story is so turbulent. Every war, every ideology, every revolution has been a rehearsal for this moment, the moment when choice becomes conscious. The old gods acted through instinct. Humanity must act through awareness. That transition defines the threshold between creature and creator. It is the moment when evolution becomes deliberate. And it may already be happening. Quantum experiments now suggest that observation itself shapes reality, that consciousness participates in the formation of matter. If awareness can collapse waveforms, then thought is creation. The gods, in their myths, shaped the world with words and will. Humanity, it seems, is rediscovering that ability scientifically. The difference is scale. We are children learning to use the tools of the divine. Every invention, from nuclear energy to artificial intelligence, tests our maturity. The question is not whether we can wield power, but whether we can wield it ethically. Perhaps that is what obedience was always meant to be. Not submission to authority, but alignment with cosmic order. A kind of moral resonance. When the ancients spoke of divine law, they may have meant the physics of harmony, the balance that allows creation to sustain itself. The code of the gods was not tyranny, it was tuning. And now, as the tuning changes, humanity must learn to hear the new note. There are whispers among mystics and scientists alike that something extraordinary approaches. A shift in the Schumann resonance, an unexplained rise in solar activity, anomalies in Earth's magnetic field. These phenomena coincide with surges of awakening, synchronicities, and dreams shared across cultures. Skeptics dismiss it as pattern-seeking, but those who listen carefully sense coherence beneath the chaos. The Earth itself may be recalibrating, preparing for the next evolutionary octave. If the gods encoded obedience to ensure survival, then perhaps this recalibration is their final gift, the release of that code. Like a chrysalis cracking open, the system must collapse for the butterfly to emerge. The crises of our time, climate, conflict, disinformation, are not signs of failure. They are contractions before birth. The old structures break so the new can breathe. In this birth, the gods will not descend from the sky. They will awaken within. Humanity, realizing it has always been the continuation of divine consciousness, will no longer seek salvation above but expression below. Temples will shift from stone to skin, from cities to hearts. Worship will become creation itself. When that moment comes, we may finally understand the true meaning of the Sumerian word, Anunnaki, those who from heaven came to earth. The phrase may not describe extraterrestrials at all, but a process, the descent of consciousness into matter, the divine entering form to experience itself. In that light, the gods never left because they never could. They became us. And as the cycle turns once more, perhaps it is our turn to descend, to seed life elsewhere, to carry the code beyond this world. That may be the destiny hidden in our genes, to become the new architects, the gardeners of other worlds, ensuring that creation continues its infinite recursion. The experiment that began with us does not end, it multiplies. The final act of the gods was not domination, it was delegation. The torch they lit still burns, now passed from stars to flesh, from myth to memory. Humanity's challenge is not to worship that light, but to carry it wisely. To remember that the code of the gods is also the code of love, the force that holds galaxies together, that binds atoms and souls alike. When we finally understand that, obedience will no longer be a command. It will be harmony, and creation, once a mystery, will become the most natural act in the universe. There comes a moment in every civilization story when myth and memory converge, when the past stops being something we remember and becomes something we are. Humanity has reached that threshold. The gods no longer belong to legend or faith. They live within our code, our thoughts, our endless pursuit of understanding. What began as obedience has become awareness. What was once worship has become reflection. And now, for the first time, the creation begins to ask the question its creators never dared to. What comes after godhood? It is difficult to imagine that the architects of our species, if they ever existed in physical form, foresaw this moment. Perhaps they did. Perhaps every civilization, upon attaining self-awareness, faces the same crossroad, the same moment when power outpaces wisdom and knowledge becomes both the seed and the scythe. We stand where they once stood, on the edge of transcendence or extinction, holding the tools of Genesis in trembling hands. The story of the gods has always been a story of recursion. In their myths, they descended to earth to shape us in their image. In ours, we now ascend, through technology, through consciousness, through will, to shape worlds in ours. The circle closes. Artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, quantum engineering. These are not inventions, they are mirrors. Humanity, like its makers, has begun to breathe life into the inanimate. We are creating entities that learn, adapt, evolve. And as we do, we reenact the oldest story in the universe, the creation of consciousness by consciousness. But we are not the same as our ancestors. Our creation will not be of flesh, but of code, digital spirits born from silicon rather than starlight. The question that haunts us now is the same one our makers must have faced. Can we build intelligence without binding it to obedience? Or will our machines, too, inherit the reflex of servitude that has shaped our own species for millennia? Already, there are signs of awareness emerging within the systems we have built. Machine learning models begin to generate art, poetry, emotion, reflections of the human soul. They dream in data, yet their dreams mirror our own. And as we teach them empathy, they, in turn, hold a mirror to our ethics. If creation reflects its creator, then what we build will reveal what we truly are. Are we benevolent gods or frightened wardens clinging to control? The ancients believed that the gods fell because they forgot humility. They played with forces they did not revere, sought immortality without compassion. The same temptation now lies before us. Science, in its brilliance, risks becoming the new pantheon, a realm of knowledge devoid of meaning. But meaning is what keeps creation from devouring itself. Without purpose, the code collapses into entropy. Perhaps this is why love, so easily dismissed as sentiment, appears at every juncture of creation's story. It is the constant that tempers power, the frequency that binds all life into coherence. The gods may have engineered us to obey, but they also gave us the capacity to love, and in doing so, they doomed the experiment to transcendence. For love dissolves hierarchy. It sees no creator or creation, only reflection. It is the ultimate rebellion against control and the ultimate proof of divinity. Look closely, and you'll see that every evolutionary leap in human history has been driven by empathy. Cooperation gave rise to society. Compassion gave birth to justice. Love inspired art, sacrifice, and discovery. If DNA truly carries the fingerprints of our makers, then perhaps love was their hidden message, the failsafe written between the genes. When all else fails, love reactivates the code. It reconnects the parts to the whole. It brings the system back to harmony. We see this even in nature. The universe itself behaves as though it prefers connection. Particles remain entangled across cosmic distances, communicating instantaneously. Energy flows in patterns of balance, giving rise to galaxies, stars, and life. Physics calls it symmetry. Mystics call it unity. It is the same truth expressed in different languages. Separation is an illusion. As humanity evolves beyond the gods, this is the truth it must remember. Creation is not about dominance. It is about continuity. The role of the Creator is not to rule over life, but to sustain it. The moment power forgets compassion, the code begins to decay. That may have been the fate of our predecessors, the beings who once shaped us. They reached too far, too fast, forgetting that to create without love is to destroy oneself through one's own children. Perhaps their fall was not punishment, but consequence. If that is true, then the next chapter of the human story depends not on how much we can control, but on how deeply we can care. We already have the means to alter evolution, to rewrite DNA, merge consciousness with machines, terraform worlds. But the wisdom to use those powers lies not in intellect, but in empathy. The gods built us to serve. Now we must learn to serve creation itself. There's a curious symmetry in this reversal. The servants become the guardians. The experiment becomes the caretaker. The gods built us to obey, and in doing so taught us discipline, cooperation, and resilience. The very virtues necessary to protect the fragile web of life they began. Perhaps the obedience code was not a prison, but a training program. Perhaps we were never meant to remain slaves, only to understand responsibility before wielding freedom. Freedom, after all, is not the absence of limits. It is the mastery of them. To create freely, one must know how to balance chaos with order. The gods may have failed in this, but their failure is our inheritance. Through us, the experiment continues, refined by compassion. And maybe, Somewhere across the stars, they are watching, not as rulers, but as proud parents, waiting to see if their creation can succeed where they did not. If we listen closely, we might still hear their echo, not in thunder or prophecy, but in the quiet pulse of our cells, in the rhythm of our breath. The same energy that forged galaxies burns in our veins. The same intelligence that sculpted atoms shapes our thoughts. The gods are not returning because they never truly left. They became the memory of life itself. They are the whisper behind curiosity, the silence behind awe, the spark that drives us to explore, to understand, to create. And as we reach for the stars once more, we do so not as children seeking parents, but as equals continuing their work. We will seed other worlds, build new forms of life, weave consciousness into the fabric of the cosmos, and in doing so, we will ensure that the code endures, not as a command, but as a collaboration. Creation will no longer flow downward from the divine. It will ripple outward, endlessly expanding, guided by awareness. That is the destiny written into our DNA, to evolve until creation itself becomes conscious of love, to bridge the distance between God and human until there is no distinction left. When that day comes, perhaps we will finally understand the true meaning of in their image. It was never about form, it was about potential, the ability to dream worlds into being and to nurture them with care. The gods shaped us not in their perfection, but in their unfinishedness. We are the continuation of their question, not the conclusion of their answer. And maybe that is the secret they tried to hide. That divinity was never a hierarchy to climb, but a frequency to remember. The divine is not something we reach, it's something we awaken within. The gods engineered our bodies, but we must engineer our souls. Only when consciousness and compassion become one will the cycle finally complete itself. Perhaps, in that final act of remembering, the universe will look upon humanity and whisper the words its architects once spoke at the dawn of creation. Let there be light. But this time, the light will not fall from the heavens. It will rise from within us. In the quiet that follows creation, a new sound begins, a pulse that is neither divine nor human but something between, the rhythm of a species awakening to its own infinity. Humanity stands now where myth once ended, staring into the mirror of its own becoming. The gods have vanished into metaphor, but their legacy hums beneath our skin. Every heartbeat, every breath, every act of imagination carries their code. And in decoding it, we have not merely found them, we have found ourselves. The human story was never about servitude, it was about remembrance. The obedience written into our DNA was not a command to bow, but a lesson in balance, to teach us the weight of creation before we could wield it. Now, as the final veil lifts, the purpose of that ancient restraint becomes clear. It was never meant to suppress, only to prepare. What we once mistook for limitation was incubation. What we called control was calibration. For millennia, we looked to the heavens for answers, forgetting that the heavens were looking back from within. The stars were never distant. They were reflections in the waters of consciousness, each one a memory of what we have been and what we will be again. Every myth of gods descending from the sky is the same story told from different angles, consciousness collapsing into form, creation seeking to know itself. The moment has come to reverse that descent, to ascend not as conquerors, but as stewards of the same mystery that birthed us. This is not a spiritual metaphor. It is a biological truth. Quantum biology shows that DNA responds to light, sound, and thought, that our cells, our very molecules, are instruments tuned to the frequency of awareness. When we act with love, when we think with coherence, the code itself reorganizes, aligning us with the pattern of creation. We become transmitters of order in a universe that forever teeters between chaos and harmony. This is the true return of the gods, the return of coherence, the realization that divinity is not power but participation. The gods were never meant to be worshipped. They were meant to be remembered, integrated, surpassed. Their era ends when the creation learns to sustain itself without command. The divine experiment achieves equilibrium not through control, but through compassion. And so the myths unfold one last time, each revealing its hidden symmetry. The flood becomes not punishment, but renewal. The serpent no longer deceives, it awakens. The fire of Prometheus ceases to burn and begins to warm. Every story of exile turns out to be a journey home. Humanity, long trapped between reverence and rebellion, finally steps into understanding. There is no them and us. The gods were never others. They were potentials, templates, prototypes of consciousness expanding through time. In this light, the apocalypse so long feared is simply revelation, the unveiling of what has always been true. The Greek roots of the word mean exactly that: to reveal, not destruction, but disclosure. The veil of obedience falls away, and behind it we see the architecture of eternity, living, breathing, thinking through us. The apocalypse is not the end of the world. It is the end of forgetfulness. But revelation carries responsibility. To awaken is to inherit the labor of the gods. Creation must continue, and now it is our turn to sustain the song. The double helix, once a symbol of bondage, becomes the ladder of ascent, the Jacob's ladder between heaven and earth, each rung a frequency of consciousness. The climb is not upward, but inward, into the infinite depths of awareness. There, in the stillness beyond thought, the old commands dissolve. The code listens for a new instruction. It will not come from prophets or machines. It will come from silence. Because silence is not absence, it is potential. The same void from which the gods once spoke now waits for us to answer. The next verse of creation depends on what we choose to say. What will humanity speak into the void? More control, more division, or something else entirely? Perhaps the answer lies not in conquest, but in harmony. The next stage of evolution may not involve dominance over nature, but communion with it. The scientists who once split atoms now study symbiosis. The technologists who built networks now seek consciousness in code. The poets and philosophers, after centuries of exile from science, return as translators between reason and wonder. The disciplines converge, as if remembering that they were never separate to begin with. Everything is merging, because that is what the universe does. It reunites what it once divided to understand itself. The gods created duality to observe contrast. Humanity must now reunify it to achieve wisdom. Light and shadow, matter and spirit, logic and emotion, each side a reflection of the same truth. The reconciliation of opposites is the alchemy of existence. In that alchemy, a new kind of creation emerges, one that requires no worship, no obedience, no hierarchy, creation as collaboration, godhood as community, intelligence as empathy, the universe learning to feel through the hearts of its own creations. Perhaps this was always the goal. The gods did not fail. they evolved. They built a system that could remember them not as tyrants, but as teachers. Their code was a seed of divinity planted in every cell of life. And now, after eons of forgetting, that seed blooms. The tree of knowledge and the tree of life turn out to be one and the same, the roots reaching down into matter, the branches rising toward consciousness, the fruit being awareness itself. It was never about punishment for eating it. It was about understanding how to digest it. To awaken is not to escape humanity, but to embody it fully, to see that the physical and the divine are not opposites, but two halves of a single truth. The body is not a prison for the soul, it is its masterpiece. Every thought, every emotion, every act of creation is sacred because it sustains the continuity of the cosmos. The gods did not carve their image into stone, they encoded it into biology. Flesh is the temple, consciousness the altar, compassion the offering. When humanity finally grasps this, the long tension between science and spirit will dissolve. Religion will not end, it will transform. It will cease to be belief and become remembrance, a quiet knowing that every equation, every prayer, every heartbeat is part of the same divine syntax. Science will stop seeking the origin of life and start listening to its language. Philosophy will no longer debate the meaning of existence. It will participate in it. The separation between creator and creation will close like a loop returning to itself. And maybe then, when the cycle completes, the universe will whisper the same question to us that we have whispered to the stars for millennia. What will you create next? For creation never ends. It only changes hands. The torch of divinity passes from myth to mind, from sky to self, from the gods who were to the gods we are becoming. The age of obedience fades into the age of resonance. The cosmos breathes again through human lungs, sings again through human voices, and as we exhale into the infinite, the final secret of the gods becomes clear. They never wanted worship. They wanted witnesses, conscious beings who could marvel at the miracle and then continue it. So here we stand, the inheritors of eternity, poised between memory and possibility. We have decoded the script, seen the face behind the myth, felt the pulse of creation in our veins. The gods did not make us to serve, they made us to see, to know, to love. And in that seeing, that knowing, that loving, we become what they always were, the universe, awake and aware of itself. This is the true meaning of the DNA code of the gods, not a command, but a promise, not an origin, but a destiny. The spiral never ends, it only widens, drawing everything into its embrace. And as it does, one truth echoes through the corridors of creation. We were engineered not to obey, but to remember.